That was me lulling you into a false sense of security before the questioning begins.
The app's parent company is effectively beholden to the Chinese government.
That could be an act of war. And third, we will respond decisively.
Diversity. Diverse. The 2020 presidential election was the safest, most secure election in our nation's history. The 2016 election preceding it was scarred by Russian hacking and broad disinformation campaigns.
150 million users of TikTok in the United States. How valuable is that data to the CCP?
I didn't know that I was afraid of heights until that moment, but it was illuminating. We've worked together for a year. You have aged me personally 3 years in that time. There have been moments when I have lied awake in bed thinking, you know, life would be easier if you did leave, but now I'm sad. If I had to negotiate with Xi Jinping with the fate of the free world on the line, I would want you on my team because I know you would drive him crazy. So we are privileged to have a great panel of witnesses. The Honorable Harry Coker Jr. is the nation's second confirmed National Cyber Director, a position which came out of our work on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Christopher Wray is obviously the Director of the FBI. Jen Easterly is the Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and General Paul Nakasone is Commander of the United States Cyber Command and Director of the National Security Agency. I, too, want to thank you, General Nakasone. I don't want to play favorites on the panel, but when I called you to try and convince you to do this, I felt a little guilty because you're doing your change of command today, but the fact that you were willing to do this, I think, is the ultimate testament, more than any of the awards you're wearing on your uniform today, just to the type of public servant that you are, that you would be willing to do this. And like whether you're redeploying or changing command, usually you kind of drop your pack with about a week to go. You took a massive new rock in your pack because you felt so passionately about this issue. My experience working with you as chairman of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, you were always forthcoming and generous with your time. So I just want at the outset of this hearing to thank you for an exceptional career of public service. The nation owes you a great debt of gratitude. I would stand for that. That was me lulling you into a false sense of security before the questioning begins.
Chinese military doctrine to attempt to induce societal panic in their adversary. And arguably, the Chinese government got a little bit of a taste of this in the aftermath of the ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, May of 2021, that shut down gas to the eastern seaboard for several days. Americans couldn't get to work, they couldn't take their kids to school, get folks to the hospital. It caused a bit of panic. Now imagine that on a massive scale. Imagine not one pipeline, but many pipelines disrupted. Telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water. Trains get derailed. Air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario. And it's one where the Chinese government believes that it will likely crush American will for the US to defend Taiwan.
And Director Wray, remind me again of this stat I thought was stunning in your opening statement, that if you focused all of the FBI's cyber professionals on the China threat, we would still be at what sort of disadvantage with respect to the humans in China that are focusing on America?
We would be at a disadvantage of at least 50 to 1.
50 to 1.
And part of the reason I say at least is because one of the things we've also seen from the Chinese government, which has devoted massive resources to the biggest hacking program in the world by a mile, is that they also work with cyber criminals.
What is the risk posed by TikTok, in your opinion?
Well, the most important starting point is the role of the Chinese government. The app's parent company is effectively beholden to the Chinese government, and that is what in turn creates a series of national security concerns in the PRC government's ability to leverage that access or that authority. So first, the data It gives them the ability to control data collection on millions of users, which could be used for all sorts of intelligence operations or influence operations. Second, the recommendation algorithm, which could be used for all sorts of influence operations or to sow divisiveness, discord.
What we have done over the past 5 years is been able to look at imposing cost in a much broader fashion. Whether or not it's publishing in an unclassified manner, what the adversary is doing, whether or not it's working with the Bureau, whether or not it's being able to work closely with Justice and Treasury, this is the idea of consistently being able to persistently be engaged with your adversary.
I just want to send a message to anybody who's paying attention here, whether it's a CCP or anyone else who would intend to put malware into our critical infrastructure. First, we will attribute it back to you if it's activated. Secondly, that could be an act of war. And third, we will respond decisively.
What makes the PRC activities like embedding latent malware into systems, what makes it unique in relation to other responsible cyber actors?
Responsible cyber actors of democracies like our own do not target the civilian infrastructure. There's no reason for them to be in our water. There's no reason for them to be in our power. This is a decision by an actor to actually focus on civilian targets. That's not what we do.
Director Easterly, you talked about holding software companies liable for the software that they've written for a variety of different sources, especially the electric grid. Give me your perspective on how we would most effectively do that. How could we do that in a timely way? How could we make sure that it's done in two ways to make sure that any future software that's written is held liable for its vulnerabilities, and how do we retroactively then address software that's already there that exposes those liabilities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As you pointed out, this is both a current problem and a legacy issue. Yeah. What is critical is that we start now to develop a regime, and this was part of the National Cyber Strategy, that can actually hold software makers liable for creating defective technology. Because frankly, I believe if we had something like that and that was put in place at the dawn of the internet and when software was developed, we would not be in a world where the internet's full of malware and software is rife with vulnerabilities.
How would you characterize the cooperation, the proactive nature of public and private entities across the energy sector?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So as the National Coordinator for Critical Infrastructure Resilience and Security, we work with what's called sector committees, essentially, that have representation from critical infrastructure owners and operators. One of the things that I found most impressive since I came into this role is that the energy sector, the people at that table are CEOs. And you do not see that across every sector. And that really shows that CEOs in the energy sector understand this issue and understand the need to make significant investments in their cybersecurity and in their cyber resilience.
Do you want to say anything about these aging routers that Director Wray referred to with Volt Typhoon, and how are they targeting Americans and what folks need to know?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So just to help folks understand, and my teammates can weigh in as well, when we talk about malware has been mentioned several times. This is actually not a malware issue. And that's why the name of that cybersecurity advisory was Living Off the Land. What these Chinese cyber actors are doing is essentially finding a vulnerability and then finding ways to live within a computer's operating system. So they're actually very, very hard to detect because they look like any other person who's operating on it, and they've elevated their ability to act like a system administrator. So you really can't tell that's a Chinese actor. That's essentially what they're doing on these routers so that they can build these large, essentially, botnets for command and control to allow them to have a launching pad on our critical infrastructure where they take advantage of yet another vulnerability.
The General mentioned this. Should the government expand its role in the public-private partnerships? And all of this, how does this all occur without infringing on the First Amendment, the right to free speech, and also each state's constitutional free and equal elections clause? And then just for people listening to this, this hearing, what gives you confidence and faith that in our ability to ensure free and fair elections? So I'll start with you, General Nakasone.
Let me start with the last part of your question, Congressman, which is we've done this before and we've done it successfully before. 2018, 2020, 2022, all of the agencies at this table have been working together. This is our fourth effort in terms of election security, and I'm very confident in terms of what we will be able to deliver, a safe and secure election. That's based upon the fact that not only has our methodology gotten better, but our partnerships have expanded. It's not just the partners at this table, it's the private sector. It's understanding internationally where we need to be able to partner and see what adversaries are doing outside the United States and do that very effectively.
It's a really important question. Thank you. So CISA serves as the sector risk management agency for election infrastructure security. So we lead the federal effort to support state and local election officials who are those on the front line of managing, administering, and defending election infrastructure. I have confidence because of the enormous amount of time that I've spent with secretaries of state, chief election officials, state election directors who work every day to ensure that they can effectively defend their election infrastructure from the full range of threats, from cyber threats, from physical threats, from operational risks, and from foreign malign influence. And I think what's incredibly important is for the American people to understand the enormous amount of work that's been done with our partners in the federal government, but at the state and local level and with industry to improve the security and the resilience of our election infrastructure. One thing to note that it's the diversity and decentralization of our election infrastructure because it's managed by state, by 8,800 separate jurisdictions around the country. That heterogeneity gives it resilience. And there's also enormous amounts of controls, physical, technological, procedural, that keeps that infrastructure resilient. So the American people should have confidence in the integrity of our election infrastructure, and every American, if they have any questions about it, serve as a poll worker, serve as an observer, talk to your local election officials, and ask them questions. It's a transparent process, but everybody should support their election officials who are working hard to ensure the integrity of our most foundational democratic process.
Thank you. Mr. Wray.
Well, I would second the remarks of both of my colleagues. I will just add, in terms of things that we're concerned about, you alluded to the role of deepfakes. Obviously, AI will enhance some of the same information warfare that we've seen from our foreign adversaries for quite some time. We're also concerned about the ways in which misinformation, disinformation warfare, if you will, from a foreign adversary and cyber attacks can work in tandem. And I think, for example, about the Iranians' effort in the fall of 2020 that Director Ratcliffe and I did a public announcement about, where you had a cyber intrusion that was not as effective as the Iranians might have wanted others to think it was, but they had built sort of a disinformation campaign on top of it. We were able to expose it and largely render it ineffective, working with all of our partners up here. But that's the kind of thing that I think we will see more of. So what am I confident in? I'm confident in my partners. Americans can be confident in our election system and our democracy, but I am also mindful of the fact that our adversaries are getting more and more sophisticated, and that there are more and more foreign adversaries who want to get in on this game.
Given the threats that we've laid out today, do you have a message for young Americans who might want to do something about this?
The future of our nation, the future of our economy is tied so closely to the future of our ability to operate in cyberspace. If you're looking for challenge, if you're looking for fulfillment, I would tell you that any of the agencies that you see here provide a mission and a responsibility that would dwarf your imaginable expectations. And I truly believe in the importance of national service, and I would encourage all Americans to think about that.
To build and operate its factory in my district, Goshen plans to bring 20 to 50 Chinese nationals to Michigan. If that happens, how confident are you that it will not be used for espionage? In other words, do you believe there's a risk these individuals will be spies working in the United States?
Well, I'd have to drill in deeper on the specific example to be able to weigh in on that. But what I can tell you is that a lot of this ultimately traces back to the blurry, if not non-existent, line between the Chinese government and its private sector, and their ability, the Chinese government's ability to, should they choose to leverage that authority, that reach, that access, in a way that undermines our national security, which is why acquisitions, buying land, buying businesses, and so forth, while maybe legal, can still raise national security concerns. I'll give you one example that's public. So GE Aviation, a major public, very sophisticated company, entered into a joint venture with, it wasn't a Chinese company, but the Chinese were able to recruit an insider at the joint venture. The joint venture was then able to get access to sensitive GE information, which then he used to help Chinese intelligence officers back in China hack GE's systems.
Mr. Coker, I just want to turn to you. How do you feel about our readiness and preparation in that kind of capacity? Are we doing everything we need to at the federal, state, and local level?
Thank you for the question and the concern. And while I am very confident that we're taking the steps that we need to, for example, I think you heard about some of the exercises that we worked with CISA on to prepare our sector risk management agencies for these types of situations. I am concerned that we continue to work with the state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. We've said several times today, they're on the front lines, these types of actions, and I view them as being a combatant commander, if you will, with many of us being supporting commanders.
Congressman, Section 702 is the most important authority that the National Security Agency uses every single day to keep Americans safe and to secure our nation. As someone who was at the Pentagon on 9/11, to consider that we would return to the days before Section 702, where we couldn't connect the dots, is almost inexplicable to me. The other piece that I would add to your question is 702 is so agile that it provides us an ability to see the Chinese precursor chemicals that are being used to feed fentanyl, which is the scourge of our nation. 100,000 Americans lost their lives in 2022. 702 allows us to identify those precursors that saves lives. The final point that I would offer is that of the surveillance authorities that are out there today, the most transparent, the most effective, the most important authority is 702. It balances civil liberties and privacy and the requirements of our national security.
Director Easterly, who's winning the quantum computing arms race?
I would probably ask General Nakasone to weigh in on that specifically.
Congressman, you point out one of the critical things that we're moving towards right now. Our agency creates the keys, codes, and cryptography that ensures the underlying encryption of our nation. We are developing those keys, codes, and cryptography in partnership with NIST to ensure that our nation is safe from a quantum computer, which you just described. National Security Memorandum 10 talks about this. We are well on the way to being able to do that, and we will be able to defeat any type of quantum capability that the Chinese have in the future.
There are multiple leaders, the CISA director, national cyber director, the deputy national security advisor for cyber and emergency technology, the head of Cybercom, who play a role in setting cyber policy. And there are multiple law enforcement agencies, FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security investigations, that play a role in combating cyber crimes like ransomware. Who is in charge of coordinating the various moving parts of cyber policymaking and law enforcement?
Statutorily, it's the Office of the National Cyber Director that serves that purpose, sir.
And how does your role differ from that of the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies? What's the difference between those two roles?
The National Security Council writ large yields all mechanisms of national power, and cyber is but one. So when the NSC provides guidance and advice to the President, it's far broader than cyber. Our domain is on...
No, but there's a deputy NSA specifically for cyber. So how does that role differ from yours?
We work very closely together, but the big difference is there is more of an operational flavor to that role than my role. Again, our office is providing strategic and policy guidance, not operational guidance, which is what the National Security Council does with our colleagues. Again, far broader than cyber, but more operational than the Office of the National Cyber Director. But I also want to be real clear that we work very closely together. Literally weekly, we have a sync, leader to leader, but our staffs are working together daily.
It seems to me that our ports are becoming more reliant on equipment, technology, infrastructure from PRC-affiliated firms. I find that concerning. Is that a legitimate threat?
Yes.
So I think it's a good example of the theme that we've been talking about in this hearing in other contexts as well, right? Which is if you're talking about Chinese businesses, there is the potential that they can be leveraged by the Chinese government. I would just add to those very good points that much as Director Easterly referred to in her opening statement, same thing in the context of ports and maritime security more broadly, we need victims to reach out to us immediately, because the victim who reaches out to us immediately is the one who's going to supply the information that will enable us not just to be able to share information with them to better mitigate and prevent their attack from becoming worse, but more importantly, in many ways, prevent the attack from metastasizing to other sectors and other businesses.
This question is for any of you who want to tackle it, but what can we in the U.S. government do to, one, turbocharge our ability to turn on their civic discourse, whether with Starlink or other means, and to two, to make sure that that decision is U.S. government's decision, not Elon Musk's decision?
I'd like to start, Congressman. I think the key piece that you just talked about is what we've all realized, which is the what we do hasn't changed a lot. The National Security Agency, we do signals intelligence, we do cybersecurity. At U.S. Cyber Command, we do cyberspace operations. It's the how. The how is changing so rapidly. And this is where we have an impact against China. Much in the same way Grant in the Wilderness Campaign decided that we're going to focus on our strengths, not worry about his adversary. That's the same thing we have here. We have our strengths. Our strengths begin with our partnership. Our strengths begin with the fact that we are able to talk with our private sector and be able to understand broadly what is going on. The fact that we are now publishing these type of insights in an unclassified manner, hanging them on our websites, must and will.
But do we have a
concern the
plan,
Chinese.
General? Do we have, and maybe this is for Mr. Coker or Ms. Easterly, but do we have a plan for internet freedom in Iran, in Russia, in China, so that their populations can engage? The Ayatollah is 84 years old. He's got advanced prostate cancer. There's going to be a succession soon. Are we ensuring that the Iranian people have as much of a voice as possible in making their discontent known as that succession planning is happening? Same thing, of course, in China. That's what really keeps Xi Jinping up at night, I believe, is not actually U.S. politics. It's latent Chinese politics.
Well, I'll come at it from the FBI's end. I mean, much of what you're talking about are operations that would take place, in those countries. But that's why when we call out transnational repression by all the governments you listed off, that's so important, because those repressive techniques that you're talking about, they're not just doing them in their home countries, they're exporting it onto U.S. soil.
I would be curious what the FBI is doing right now to further secure these critical areas to ensure that we are stopping these threats to the American people before they happen.
So we are tackling it through a combination of investigations, intelligence sharing, and engagement. And to break that down a little bit further, we have in all 56 of our field offices counterintelligence task forces that are FBI-led, but that have representatives serving on them from the relevant military agencies that are in that area, as well as in many cases state and local law enforcement, who are a very important part of giving us sort of additional fort multiplier to help counter the threat. And so we've had a number of investigations into different kinds of efforts by actors associated with the PRC to spy on, if you will, or in other ways target our military installations.
Can you address really the importance of a rip and replace program, not just for this level, but maybe do we need to look at expanding it further? And what are the consequences of us not taking action here?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly complex supply chains, as you know. But when it comes down to some basic fundamentals, I think you pointed out around the bill itself, 24,000 pieces of Chinese software in these supply chains. And so it's imperative that we help the owners of some of these less resourced entities to be able to make these important changes to reduce risk. Two things I would add is we co-lead what's called the Information Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. And so I'm not even sure that they know that there may be capabilities with funding to do that rip and replace. So I think that education there is incredibly important.
One of our greatest assets, something which the CCP overlooks, is our diversity. As Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris have both said, our diversity is our power. One aspect in which we can and must do so much more is to build and rely on a diverse pool of talent in the field of cybersecurity. I know this is a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration and for all of you as leaders of your respective agencies. So turning to you, Director Coker, I know this topic is something important to you and you have spoken about it before. Can you speak on the administration's broad effort to increase our cyber workforce by sourcing talent from diverse places and the benefit it brings to our ability to combat CCP efforts?
Thank you so much for that question and that important topic. And to me and the administration, diversity is all about achieving positive mission outcomes. That message cannot be misunderstood. It's about positive mission outcomes, and we do that by having the strongest teams possible. I talked to 500,000 open cyber jobs. So whatever we've been doing lately hasn't been working. So what do we need to do to fix that? We have the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy that has its pillar. The two that are most relevant to your question are expanding the federal cyber workforce and then America's writ large. We need to do that by, number one, having people realize the impact to national security. We talked about national service. I think Americans want to serve our nation and need to be clear about cybersecurity is serving our nation. So the administration's perspective is let's find the right people, looking in places we haven't necessarily looked before. And why? Because we need more, better, different people to achieve positive mission outcomes.
As we frequently remind everyone, the 2020 presidential election was the safest, most secure election in our nation's history. However, the 2016 election preceding it was scarred by Russian hacking and broad disinformation campaigns, which severely compromised the integrity of the election. Anyone on the panel, if you would be willing to answer the question or address this, in an unclassified setting, is there any evidence at this time the CCP is using artificial intelligence to interfere in the U.S. elections? And how do we ensure this election is free from CCP influence? And I only have 8 seconds, so sorry.
Negative 11 seconds.
Probably defer to my Intel colleagues on whether the CCP is actively using artificial intelligence. But based on the DNI's report in December about the activity in the 2022 midterms, which talked about the aggregate scope and scale of foreign activity and influence and interference being more than we saw in 2018, and specifically Chinese attempts at influence, we should expect it. We should absolutely expect that foreign actors will attempt to influence and that they will interfere. But to be very clear, Americans should have confidence in the integrity of our election infrastructure because of the enormous amount of work that's been done by state and local election officials, by the federal government, by vendors, by the private sector since 2016, since election infrastructure was designated as critical infrastructure.
There's 150 million users of TikTok in the United States. How valuable is that data to the CCP?
Enormously valuable.
Okay. So, Mr. Wray, knowing that it is critical for the United States to win the race to AI, and TikTok is a huge source of data, actually in a language that they need, because I believe that the Chinese language is actually a disadvantage and that they need more Western languages in order to win that race. How critical to our security is well, TikTok is providing all this data to the CCP. Do you think that's a security threat to the United States?
I have very significant security concerns about TikTok. And it's a combination of the ability that the Chinese government would have to, if they choose to exercise it, to control the collection of the data, to control the recommendation algorithm, and if they wanted to be able to control and compromise devices. And if you layer AI, as you're saying, right on top of all that, it just amplifies those concerns.
Director, I'm running out of time, and I need to ask you a question. It's a direct question. It's a tough one, probably. I don't know how you're going to answer it. Would you ban TikTok in the United States? It's a yes or no.
Well, there's a decision-making process that's outside my lane, but let me try to answer it this way. As long as the Chinese government has the ability to control all these aspects of the business, I don't see how you get your way clear to mitigating those concerns.
Fair enough. We also find out that in a lot of instances, the software is shipped to China, stays there for over a year, and then it's installed in China, and we don't know what happens to it in that time. And so operating that software, knowing that software, either reporting back to China or that somehow it can be turned off at any time, think about it. 80% of the world's commerce is controlled by those cranes. So thank you, and I'm way over, so thank you very much for indulging me, Mr. Chairman.
Apparently the lights are also controlled by somebody. Carlos and I climbed up in one of those cranes. In Miami. I didn't know that I was afraid of heights until that moment, but it was illuminating.
What is the CCP's motivation, as far as you know and can share, with cybersecurity threats and actions? Because we've been hearing colleagues and everyone talking about all these little examples and all the tools and this and that. But what's the goal here? Is it to chip away at our economy? Is it to make us look weak? And in fact, I think even just some of what we're positing today is perpetuating, I think, some of this position of weakness rather than strength, because much of this technology is technology we've created. But that's another point. I'm more interested in the why.
Well, my starting point would be that, as with most questions about the Chinese government's tactics and strategy, when one asks, is it A, B, or C, the answer is usually D, all the above.
I'm in agreement in that the goal is to supplant the U.S. We are in a competition with China, and frankly, they're the only nation that has the means to reshape the international order, and means being diplomatic, economic, military. We are in a competition. We have to acknowledge that. Will not lose sight of it. We also need to manage that competition responsibly.
So how much we know that inside of China, that what they are doing to us and to other countries?
We have a tremendous amount of insight in terms of how they're organized, what their plans are, and what they're doing. This is one of the things that the National Security Agency spends a tremendous amount of time on, and we have a very, very good insight in terms of what their intent is.
Director Wray, could you assure the American public today that no nonviolent protester about a ceasefire of the Middle East will be investigated or surveilled by the FBI?
We are not going to be investigating nonviolent First Amendment activity.
And could you just assure, whatever their position is on the Middle East or the 2024 election, if there is an American who's out there engaged in expressing their view, whether that is for a ceasefire or whatever that is, the FBI is not going to be investigating them or surveilling them, correct?
Our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution, and we intend to do both. We embrace both parts of that mission. In our view, it doesn't matter what you're ticked off about or who you're ticked off at. There's a right way under the First Amendment to exercise those views, and we're going to help protect that. And there's a wrong way to exercise those views, and that's violence and threats, and we are going to investigate that.
Can you speak to some of the past history of profiling of Asian Americans and how, under your leadership, you're going to make sure that that doesn't happen as we appropriately investigate Chinese Communist Party threats to the United States?
We are going to aggressively pursue the threat posed by the CCP with investigations that are predicated on the facts and the law and our policies. And they're not going to be based on race, ethnicity, or national origin, and they haven't been. Now, it is the case that the Chinese government aggressively targets individuals here to enlist them in their efforts, but they also aggressively suppress and coerce and harass Chinese Americans and Chinese visitors here. And so we view as part of our role to help protect those people. And so part of the key is drawing the distinction in between the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, the malicious actor, and Chinese Americans, Chinese dissidents, the victims.
And finally, a special guest, the esteemed chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection, Representative Garbarino. I have to ask unanimous consent for the gentleman to participate and ask questions at this hearing. Unanimous consent, ominous dominus. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for allowing me to visit today as a special guest. In response to the persistence of this threat, I understand CISA has hired a new associate director to lead China operations. Can you please provide an update on the work of what's been completed over the last 6 months, and what do you have for the remainder, what plans for the remainder of the year?
Great, thanks so much. Great to see you, Chairman. Early last year, we decided to stand up a whole element under the Associate Director for China Operations, and so we hired a terrific subject matter expert, Andrew Scott, to lead that effort, really a cross-agency effort, to ensure we had a deep understanding of the threat to critical infrastructure and that we could work effectively with our partners across the interagency at the state and local level, and of course with industry, to be able to build the security and the resilience that we need to defend the nation from these threats.
As we pursue a CRA this week, the Senate might pass it, and we're going to try to pass it in the House. What is the administration doing to harmonize between agencies and departments?
And thank you for your kind words and for raising this important topic to us. Part of the National Cybersecurity Strategy has been to do regulatory harmonization. And the point of that regulatory harmonization is to reduce the burden of compliance. And the way we're going about that, we have issued a request for information and received more than 80 responses from the private sector and public sector. Right now, we are going through the process of better understanding those, again, with the goal of reducing the burden of compliance. So that's our goal right there.
I will transition to recognizing the hard work of the Democrat Staff Director, John Stivers, who is departing the committee this week after 25 years of service on the Hill, almost as long as General Nakasone has been in uniform. I will confess, John, we've worked together for a year. You have aged me personally 3 years in that time. There have been moments when I have lied awake in bed thinking, you know, life would be easier if you did leave, but now I'm sad now that it's happening. And one thing I've learned in working with John, and particularly working in the human rights community, he's been doing this since before it was cool, and he's truly a hero in the human rights community, and it's been very cool to be able to see that. And I'll give you the highest compliment I could give you, John, which is that if I had to negotiate with Xi Jinping with the fate of the free world on the line, I would want you on my team because I know you would drive him crazy. So it's been a pleasure to work with you. And with that, I recognize the ranking member.
I just want to give him a big round of applause for his service. I'm not done. I am done. I yield back. Thank you.
Without objection, questions for the record are due 1 week from today. Without objection, the committee hearing is adjourned.